Imagine waking up one morning to discover that every choice you thought you were making, what you focus on, how you spend your time, even how you see yourself, was never entirely yours to begin with, but had been quietly shaped, moment by moment, by the glowing device in your hand. The most insidious consequence of constant smartphone use is the erosion of attention, and it's not merely a minor inconvenience. It's a fundamental shift in how your mind is able to operate. Attention is the currency of your consciousness. Whatever you give it to, you are effectively allowing to shape you, and when it is constantly splintered into fragments by a barrage of notifications, quick swipes, and endless scrolling, your very capacity for sustained thought begins to deteriorate. Human beings are not designed to process reality in microbursts. Deep work, meaningful conversations, and the grasp of complex ideas all require long periods of uninterrupted concentration. The problem is that smartphones offer a seductive alternative, a constant stream of novelty. Every alert is a little hook, tugging at the threads of your focus, making it harder and harder to return to the task at hand. Over time, you may find that your tolerance for stillness is gone entirely. Reading a book feels harder. Sitting quietly in thought feels uncomfortable. Even watching a movie without checking your phone becomes a challenge. And that's because your attention span isn't just short, it's being actively trained to be short. The algorithms behind these devices are not neutral. They are designed to keep you engaged for as long as possible because your attention is profitable to someone else. This means that your brain is being conditioned, almost Pavlovian style, to expect constant stimulation. It begins to demand it. The result is that focusing on something that doesn't give you that immediate dopamine hit feels dull, even pointless, and you start abandoning tasks that require patience or effort. This erosion of attention is dangerous because it doesn't just affect your productivity. It alters your ability to think in a linear, sustained way. Imagine trying to piece together a complex puzzle, but every 30 seconds someone yanks it away and replaces it with another one. You'd never complete the first puzzle, and you'd eventually forget what it even looked like. On a deeper level, attention is not only about getting things done, it's about the quality of your experience of life itself. If your focus is always being fractured, you are never fully present in any moment. Conversations become background noise to the thoughts about the next notification. Meals are eaten while scrolling through a feed rather than tasting and savoring. Nature passes by unnoticed because your head is tilted toward a glowing screen. What is most disturbing is that you might not even notice this loss until it is far advanced. It doesn't feel like a sudden collapse. It's more like a slow leak in a vessel, draining away your capacity to immerse yourself in the richness of reality. By allowing your attention to be perpetually hijacked, you are trading away the possibility of a life lived in depth for one lived in distraction, and the tragedy is that you might not realize the cost until the bill is far too high to pay. The devices we carry in our pockets are not simply tools for communication. They are carefully engineered environments designed to command our attention and keep it locked in place for as long as possible. This is not accidental. Every swipe, every notification, every red badge icon is the result of deliberate psychological design meant to tap into the brain's reward systems. The creators of these platforms understand that human beings are wired to seek novelty and to respond to unpredictable rewards. That's why you don't get a notification at the same time every day, and why scrolling through a feed delivers something interesting or outrage, inducing only every so often. It's the same mechanism that makes slot machines so addictive. The unpredictability keeps you hooked, always chasing the next hit. What's more troubling is that this hijacking of your dopamine system slowly erodes your ability to choose freely what you give your attention to. It's no longer you deciding to check your phone, it's your phone deciding for you. When this kind of compulsive loop takes hold, the sense of autonomy you once had begins to wither. You may think you're using your device for a purpose, sending a message, looking up an address, but along the way you're pulled into unrelated content, playing videos, or endless recommendations. Feeds, minutes turn into hours without your consent. And because these interactions deliver small bursts of dopamine, they create a feedback loop that's self-reinforcing. You feel a mild reward, so you repeat the action, and over time, your brain starts craving that cycle just to feel normal. This is not far from the mechanisms that drive substance addictions, except it's socially accepted, even encouraged. People celebrate being always connected, not realizing that what's really happening is a loss of control over their own mental space. The danger of addiction by design is that it's invisible to most people while it's happening. Unlike a drug which requires you to seek it out, the smartphone is already in your hand, already woven into your life under the guise of convenience and productivity. And because it offers functional benefits, maps, banking, communication, it's easy to justify the constant engagement. But beneath that surface utility lies a persistent erosion of mental freedom. When you can't walk down the street, wait in a line, or sit in silence without reflexively reaching for your phone, that's not convenience, that's compulsion. The very moments that used to be open space for thought, observation, or creative problem solving are now occupied by algorithmically curated distractions. Over time, this design doesn't just change your habits, it changes you. It shapes your expectations of reality, making the unfiltered, unedited world seem dull in comparison to the hyper-stimulated digital one. And once your baseline for engagement has been artificially inflated, it becomes harder and harder to find satisfaction in anything that doesn't deliver the same instant, manufactured rush. Human relationships are sustained by the quality of attention we give to one another, and smartphones have introduced a persistent interference into that process. When interactions are filtered primarily through screens, something essential is lost. Eye contact, subtle changes in tone, pauses in conversation. These are all elements that build trust, empathy, and genuine understanding, yet they are diminished when communication is reduced to text, bubbles, and emojis. Even when people are physically present together, the constant presence of a smartphone on the table or in the hand signals that one's attention is divided, that the other person must compete with an unseen world of messages, updates, and alerts. This subtle shift creates a sense of disconnection, as though the relationship has been downgraded from a living, breathing exchange to a background task running alongside more urgent digital matters. Over time, this habit changes not only the depth of our relationships, but the very skills needed to maintain them. The patience to listen fully without interruption begins to fade when our minds are conditioned to expect rapid, stimulating inputs from a device. The ability to read body language, to respond thoughtfully to emotional cues, weakens when much of our interaction happens through curated, filtered content. This is compounded by the fact that online communication encourages a version of ourselves that is edited and polished, designed to be consumed rather than truly known. When we present only the highlight reel of our lives, we remove the possibility of being vulnerable in ways that build strong bonds. Real intimacy requires the sharing of imperfections, awkward silences, and unfiltered moments, all of which are harder to achieve in a digital environment. There is also the issue of displacement. Time spent on a smartphone often comes at the expense of shared physical experiences, conversations over meals, walks with friends, spontaneous gatherings. These are the situations where relationships deepen because they are lived in real time, with all the unpredictability and subtlety that entails. Instead, we find ourselves keeping up with people through social media updates, mistaking awareness of their latest posts for genuine connection. This creates an illusion of closeness while the actual emotional distance between individuals grows. The constant digital mediation of relationships can also foster a transactional mindset toward human connection. Online, it's easy to engage with others when it's convenient, to drop in and out of interactions without the natural consequences that occur in face-to-face encounters. This can lead to a diminished sense of responsibility toward the people in our lives. When someone becomes just another profile to check, rather than a person to sit with and understand, the relationship risks becoming shallow. The tragedy is that human beings are wired for deep, reciprocal bonds, and without them, a subtle loneliness begins to creep in, even in the midst of constant digital chatter. We may be more connected than ever in a technical sense, but the richness and stability of those connections are steadily eroded by the very devices we believe are helping us maintain them. Solitude has always been a vital space for the human mind, a kind of fertile ground where thoughts can settle, insights can emerge, and a deeper sense of self can take root. Yet, smartphones have intruded into that space, filling every idle moment with noise, distraction, and the presence of countless other voices. Where there once might have been stillness, there is now an endless feed of updates, opinions, and content engineered to occupy attention without demanding depth. Waiting in line, sitting on a bus, or even lying in bed at night no longer presents an opportunity to simply think or observe. Instead, the reflex is to reach for the phone, to fill the gap with something, anything, rather than face the quiet. In this way, the habit of constant phone use erodes the capacity to be alone with one's own thoughts. This loss is more profound than it might appear. Solitude is not simply about physical isolation. It is about mental space, the freedom to allow thoughts to wander, to connect ideas in unexpected ways, to reflect on experiences without interference. These moments are crucial for creativity and problem solving because they give the mind time to digest and integrate information. When every pause is interrupted by the glow of a screen, the brain never enters the deeper modes of thinking that produce original insights or lead to meaningful self-understanding. Instead, it remains locked in a shallow, reactive mode, always processing the latest incoming stimuli. Over time, this can create a kind of mental restlessness, a discomfort with one's own inner world, as if it is unfamiliar territory. Without purposeful solitude, there is also a weakening of the relationship with oneself. Smartphones provide a constant stream of external validation, entertainment, and distraction, which can make it harder to turn inward and examine one's own values, fears, and aspirations. In quiet moments, people once wrestled with their thoughts, clarified their beliefs, or simply allowed themselves to feel whatever emotions were present. Now, those moments are quickly replaced with a scroll, a tap, or a notification that sweeps the mind away from self-reflection. This avoidance of inner dialogue can leave a person feeling untethered, dependent on external input to shape their mood, opinions, and sense of identity. The absence of solitude also robs life of a certain richness. When you are never truly alone, you miss the subtle details of the world around you, the shifting light of the afternoon, the sound of distant traffic, the way your own breathing slows when you are at peace. These moments seem small, yet they are the threads that weave together a grounded, present life. By allowing smartphones to occupy every gap in our attention, we trade those quiet, grounding experiences for a constant drip of fragmented, curated content. The mind becomes like a crowded room where no single voice can be heard clearly, and in that noise, The quiet truth of who you are and what matters to you is drowned out before it has the chance to be spoken. In the digital age, identity has become something many people consciously construct and display rather than something that quietly develops through lived experiences. Social media, accessed primarily through smartphones, has amplified this tendency by offering platforms where every post, photo, and comment becomes part of a curated public image. This process may feel empowering, but it also subtly encourages a shallow approach to selfhood, one where appearance often takes precedence over authenticity. Instead of exploring who they truly are, individuals may become more concerned with how they are perceived, adjusting their behavior to align with trends, expectations, or what garners the most likes and positive reactions. The problem with this curated identity is that it often becomes a performance, an ongoing act to maintain a specific image. People choose the flattering photos, the clever captions, the milestones worth sharing, while omitting the messier, more vulnerable parts of life. Over time, the gap between the digital persona and the real self can grow so wide that it creates a sense of disconnection, even within one's own mind. The person others see online may be confident, successful, and happy, while the person behind the screen struggles with doubt, anxiety, or dissatisfaction. This split can be exhausting to maintain, and yet the constant connectivity of smartphones means the performance rarely stops. Even moments of rest or privacy are often interrupted by the need to post, update, or check responses. Another effect of this shallow identity construction is the tendency toward comparison. Social media provides a steady stream of other people's highlight reels, which can easily become the standard by which individuals measure themselves. The curated lives of others can appear effortlessly perfect, creating unrealistic benchmarks that erode self-esteem. Smartphones make this comparison cycle nearly impossible to escape, as the temptation to check for new content is ever present. The more time spent consuming these curated images, the more one risks internalizing the belief that their own unfiltered reality is inadequate. The desire to be constantly connected and validated can also weaken the ability to form a stable sense of self independent of external feedback. When identity becomes tied to likes, comments, and follower counts, self-worth is no longer self-generated. It is outsourced to an unpredictable and often superficial audience. This fosters a fragile identity that fluctuates with the ebb and flow of online engagement. Without the grounding of authentic self-exploration and acceptance, individuals may find themselves feeling adrift when the online attention fades. In the long run, this habit of shallow identity construction can limit personal growth. True self-development requires confronting discomfort, embracing flaws, and engaging in experiences that may never be shared publicly. It requires moments of failure and vulnerability that are incompatible with the polished perfection of most online personas. By allowing smartphones to mediate so much of self-expression, people risk building an identity that is more about presentation than substance, more about being seen than being known, and that, over time, can leave life feeling hollow despite constant visibility. Sleep is one of the most fundamental pillars of human health, yet smartphones have become one of the most consistent and underestimated disruptors of it. The problem begins with the simple fact that these devices are often the last thing people interact with before closing their eyes at night, and the first thing they reach for upon waking. The blue light emitted by smartphone screens interferes with the production of melatonin, the hormone that signals to the body that it is time to sleep. When melatonin levels are suppressed, the natural circadian rhythm is thrown out of balance, making it harder to fall asleep and to stay asleep. Even when a person does eventually drift off, the quality of that sleep is often poorer, with fewer deep restorative cycles, leaving them less rested and more fatigued the next day. The issue is compounded by the mental stimulation that comes from scrolling through feeds, watching videos, or engaging in online conversations late at night. These activities keep the brain in a state of alertness rather than allowing it to gradually wind down. Emotional triggers from online content, whether it's news headlines, social media drama, or even a work-related message, can activate stress responses that make it even harder to relax. The mind becomes caught in a loop of engagement when what it needs is a gradual transition into rest. Smartphones also make it easy to lose track of time. What was meant to be a quick check of messages can turn into an hour or more of consuming digital content, pushing bedtime later and later. Even once asleep, the presence of the smartphone in the bedroom can continue to interfere with rest. Notifications, vibrations, and the subtle light from the screen can create micro-awakenings, brief disruptions in sleep that the person may not even remember in the morning, but which still fragment the night's rest. The brain remains in a slightly more vigilant state when it knows the device is nearby and active, as if prepared to respond at any moment. This state of partial alertness prevents full immersion into the deeper, more restorative stages of sleep. Over time, chronic disruption of sleep due to smartphone use can have cascading effects on both mental and physical health. Fatigue diminishes cognitive function, making focus, memory, and decision-making more difficult. Mood can be affected as well, with increased irritability, anxiety, and susceptibility to stress. The immune system is weakened, metabolic processes are thrown off balance, and the risk of long-term health problems such as cardiovascular disease and depression increases. The irony is that smartphones are often marketed as tools for improving life efficiency and well-being. Yet when their use encroaches on the hours meant for rest, they undermine one of the most essential foundations of health. By keeping the mind engaged and the body on alert long past the point of fatigue, these devices effectively shorten the recovery window that sleep is meant to provide, leaving people in a constant state of low-grade exhaustion that becomes the new normal. When a person allows their smartphone to dictate the flow of their attention, they begin to shift from an active participant in life to a passive consumer of whatever information, entertainment, or stimulation the device delivers. This shift is subtle at first, but over time it weakens the very qualities that make an individual capable of independent thought and purposeful action. Instead of choosing what to focus on, the person becomes accustomed to reacting, clicking on what is suggested, watching what auto-plays, reading what is pushed into their feed. The mental muscles required to seek out knowledge, evaluate ideas critically, and engage deeply with challenging material begin to atrophy because they are no longer being exercised. The result is a gradual decline in the ability to think for oneself, to wrestle with complexity, and to produce original insights. This passivity is reinforced by the design of most digital platforms, which prioritize content that is easy to consume and emotionally stimulating over content that requires sustained intellectual effort. In such an environment, a person learns to expect information to be condensed, simplified, and presented in a way that demands little mental strain. Complex arguments are reduced to short clips, nuanced issues are flattened into slogans, and moral questions are resolved in oversimplified black and white terms. When the mind becomes habituated to this level of input, more demanding forms of engagement, reading a dense book, working through a difficult problem, or having a long, thoughtful conversation, begins to feel disproportionately exhausting. The intellectual stamina needed for serious learning and growth is replaced by an impatience for quick answers and instant gratification. There is also a moral dimension to this weakening, because the constant exposure to curated content can quietly erode one's sense of personal responsibility for understanding the truth and acting on it. If a device always tells you what to think, what to feel outraged about, and which side of an issue to take, the habit of forming your own judgments fades. Without realizing it, you may start outsourcing not only your information, but your moral compass to algorithms optimized for engagement rather than truth. This leaves you vulnerable to manipulation, more easily swayed by emotional appeals and less inclined to question narratives that confirm your existing biases. Furthermore, when life is dominated by passive consumption, the balance between creation and absorption tilts dramatically toward the latter. You spend far more time watching, scrolling, and reacting than you do building, writing, or contributing something of your own. Over time, this imbalance can lead to a sense of stagnation and frustration, as though you are observing life rather than living it. The tragedy is that human beings are capable of extraordinary creativity, resilience, and moral courage, but those capacities require deliberate cultivation. When smartphones monopolize attention and channel it into a constant flow of low-effort consumption, they don't just occupy our time, they diminish the very faculties that make it possible to live a thoughtful, principled, and truly autonomous life. If we fail to reclaim our attention, our relationships, and our inner lives from the grip of these devices, we risk trading the depth, clarity, and purpose of a fully human existence for a life of constant distraction that feels busy but leaves us empty.